one of the blessings of being in Iowa is recognizing that hard work, grit, pays dividends for the entire nation. This is a place that is not afraid of a little hard work. It goes a long way. I love that because my mother, as you said, Randy, was a single mom who raised 2 kids, and she was the reason why I understood that there is dignity in all work. She was a nurse's aide, so she changed bedpans and rolled patients for 16-hour days, and she'd come home and she'd look at my brother, who was the good-looking dude and very well-behaved, and there was me, and not as well-behaved. And as Randy said, I would probably share a little part of my story where, as a freshman in high school, I didn't do very well. I really felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. I felt like my dad wasn't around, my mom was working long hours, that there was really no reason for me to be hopeful for a really bright future. My mother would come home and she'd tell me, son, she actually said baby, you just shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll be among the stars. I heard that once, I heard that 1,000 times. My mother was a magnificent encourager. And when I nearly failed my freshman year, she came home and she said, baby? I said, I know, Mama, I know. I said, shot for the moon. She said, no, you missed that lesson. I was like, Mama, what do you mean? She said, let's go out to this tree over here. So she walked me out of our little apartment to a tree. She said, pick a branch. Why would I pick a branch? She said, take the leaves off. And she introduced me to a different form of encouragement. In the South, we call a switch a Southern apparatus of encouragement. I was thoroughly encouraged. I have never failed another subject for the rest of my life. One time, my mama was all I needed. So sometimes I feel like our country could use a little more discipline. To be honest with you. I'm not sure that they would allow us to use a switch these days, but I gotta tell you, this drug of victimhood that comes with the narcotic of despair is spreading like a cancer. It's metastasizing throughout this country, and it is making us an incredibly vulnerable nation. I'm running for president because I know America can do for anyone what she's done for me. If we focus on restoring hope, creating opportunities, and protecting the America we all love, another American century is possible. If we're going to protect America, we are going to have to stand and back the blue. Our cities around this nation need strong, powerful, well-resourced, well-trained police officers. And we have to stand with them. There is a radical faction in this nation that has been trying to defund the police while they demoralize the police. It is time for us to refund the police and respect the men and women willing to put the uniform on. I'll say that without any hesitation. Growing up in poverty, we needed the police coming in too often when everybody else was running out. It's one of the reasons why most folks in minority communities want more policing, not less. Don't believe the national narrative that we want fewer police officers. It is just dead wrong. But if we're going to protect America, we also have to close our southern border. It is wide open. It is wide open, insecure, and unsafe, and here's why. We have a president who doesn't seem to have the interest in using just $10 billion in a nation that spends $7 trillion to close the southern border and save 70,000 American lives just in the last year who died because of fentanyl. The precursors come from China, manufactured in Mexican labs, and then the cartels bring them across our southern border. For $10 billion, you close the border. For $5 billion, you use the available technology to surveil the border to stop not only the flow of fentanyl, but to stop the monstrosity of sex trafficking and human crisis that's coming across our border as well. Not to mention the 6 million illegal immigrants that have crossed our border since President Biden has taken office.
Democratic voters.
I almost said 8 million, but I can't say it quite like that. But let me just say, yes, you're right. 6 million illegal crossings before the end of Title 42. We should reinstate Title 42, not because there is a health emergency around COVID, but because there is a health emergency around fentanyl. 70,000 Americans, we could save lives by closing our southern border. And then we also need a president who will stand toe-to-toe with China. It is not the strength of President Xi or China that matters, it's the weakness of President Biden that puts us in jeopardy. We have to stop the Chinese from spying on our kids, buying our farmlands, and stealing our intellectual property to then use it against us. Strength, backbone, and a little common sense restores America and the American dream. Finally, I'll stop at these 2 points. Number one, restoring hope means making sure that every parent in every zip code is equipped with educational choice. When a parent has a choice, the kid has a chance. Kim Reynolds, your governor, has done a fabulous job of passing choice in education in this state. It should be a model for the nation. It starts at 300% of poverty, then it goes to 400% of poverty, but in the third year, it's universal. And it's incredibly important that whether you're a rural kid in Iowa or an inner city kid in Columbia, South Carolina, your parents should be equipped with choice so you have the best chance for success in your life. And creating opportunities is protecting the goose that lays the golden eggs, and that's America's economy. Free markets and capitalism is a benefit to the world, but it needs to start benefiting Americans at home. Let's create high-tech manufacturing jobs, paying 6 figures, employing Americans by decoupling a part of our economy from China and bringing those jobs home to South Carolina. Now, I was at an earlier event 15 minutes ago with the Northwest Republican Women. This lovely lady standing here says, I did not get to ask you a question. And so she seems to have the first question of today. I always get nervous though when they read the question. So my knees are buckling a little bit here, but it's gonna be okay.
I'm not reading, I'm recording.
Yes, might be worse though, by the way. That's what we have these folks for, by the way.
My name's Marguerite, and I lived in southern Louisiana for 27 years, and in the 70s, I was one of the first women that worked offshore in the oil field, and I worked in the swamp. My question is, swamps are good ecological systems. You don't want to get rid of them, but the bacteria and stuff that's in there you want to get rid of. How does your administration, because I know you're going to be our president, how are you guys going to get rid of that bacteria and bring the swamp back to a good ecological place?
I thought for a second that you were talking about Washington, D.C. I literally thought you were like treating the actual connective tissue of the underlying infection that comes from the swamp of Washington that has this bacteria that's growing, but you were actually talking about an actual swamp. So thank you very much for that. Yes.
I am talking figuratively, yeah.
Praise the Lord. Okay, I was like, wow.
Because
I didn't study science
we do have a swamp in D.C.
No doubt about it. I love the way that you did that. That was so picturesque. I could see it with my own eyes.
So once you become our illustrious president, what will your administration do to get rid of those, for a better word, idiots?
So far, y'all are very, very plain spoken and easy to understand. Democrats, idiots, not fusing the two together, but the first 2 comments I've heard so far have been very clear. So thank you for the question. I'll simply say that one of the most effective ways to help to purge the swamp of the bacteria that is built up in Washington, D.C. is to realize that the federal government should not be doing a lot of the things that we're doing today. I've talked about I would establish a 10th Amendment committee run by governors to evaluate the work done by the federal government and create a wall between what the states and local government should do as opposed to what the federal government should do. We might go back to Article 1, Section 8 and see the actual enumerated powers of the federal government and then figure out how to allow the states to do what states do better and the voters trust anyways more so. Second thing I would do is to take the agencies in Washington that may be critical for the nation, how about move them away from Washington? Get them away from this one. I'd like to take the EPA and put it in Alabama.
There you go.
You know, it'd be a fascinating experience for those two to talk to each other. You know, you could put the Energy Department in Tennessee, Tennessee Valley Authority. What I would do is take different agencies and put it in the parts of the country that actually are the best at that aspect. Why not put the entire agricultural department in the state of Iowa?
Amen.
There are ways for us to educate the bureaucrats as opposed to having the bureaucrats educate us.
Exactly.
Be very helpful. And then frankly, that we have so much waste, fraud, and abuse. Purging that out will save the American taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars. But then there's so much duplication. Eliminating the duplication in the federal government can save us, I believe, more than 10% of the money that we spend, which is over $400 billion. That alone would shrink the size of our government. And then there are certain agencies and departments that we should have an actual outcome analysis. What is coming out of this process for the American people?
I like that.
Why not let you keep your money? Don't send it to Washington and get less back. I want to break that cycle. Now, I will say that this is what I consider common sense. Having started and run my own businesses, I understand when money leaves my pocket, I can only do one thing with it. I can't compete against my own government in business. No one knows that better than the farmers of America.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Sir.
Yes, speaking of farmers in America, we have a law that supports bioeconomics. Very important to Iowa. There are tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars of investment put into Iowa. And some apparently want to pull the rug out from underneath that. What is your commit to preventing that from happening?
Questions on RFS and biofuels, where I stand. Some seem to be pulling the carpet out. Would I do the same thing, or would I stand behind RFS and biofuels? I've been very clear. I supported the last farm bill before that. I'm a big supporter of RFS. I'll tell you why. Not only because it's a wonderful opportunity to be supportive, helpful here in Iowa, but it's actually incredibly important to America's national security. The less dependent we are on foreign oil, the more secure our nation is. RFS makes us less dependent on foreign oil. It saves us hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil every single year. And that is in America's national security interest. It also creates jobs, provides a healthy footprint for our nation, but it is first and foremost a national security tool that we should be using. We should see it that way. If we saw it through the prism of national security, we would do everything we possibly could to become more independent, which not only means RFS, it also means excavating for our own energy future here in our own soils. We should be, again, energy independent. We have more energy in this country, when you add in coal, gas, and oil, than any other nation on God's green earth. We should use all of our resources to keep Americans safe and less dependent on foreign oil.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my question.
Yes, sir.
I hear a lot of what you're saying, and you sound a lot like a lot of the Republican candidates, which we can all agree on, and we all like those. My question is, our country is more divided today than it ever has been in history. And it feels like the extremes on the edges are so loud that the 70% in the middle start to pigeonhole each other by where you are, which side of center you're on. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you plan on helping to cure that divide and getting the people to have conversations? And believe me, folks, I'm not agreeing. I agree with the Democrat and the idiot thing, but I also see. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call Democrats idiots. That's what I meant.
I did.
Okay. Exactly. And there's that pigeonhole.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do we bring folks closer together to have conversations to help the people, the 70%, as I like to say, in the middle,
Yes.
realize that they have a lot more in common than what we hear in the media and other places, especially from the opposite side.
So let me give you thank you for the question about bringing our nation together in spite of our differences. About 90% of Americans share the same love for family. They want their kids to do better than they did. They want their kids to have a good education system. They want crime down in their neighborhoods. They want education up in their neighborhoods. They want jobs readily available in the neighborhoods. We have differences of opinion from a political perspective on how we achieve that outcome. I'm a guy that believes, having grown up in some really high poverty areas, that the more the government did, the worse things got for us. So that socialism in any form doesn't work. It's and the more fighting and bickering we do as Republicans, the more likely we'll see the road to socialism runs right through a divided Republican Party. Bringing this nation together is looking for the common ground that leads to common sense. I'll give you two really good examples of how that works. Even as conservatives, we should champion the cause of education. When I talk about educational choice, I talk about it not because it's a great issue of the day. I talk about it as a guy who grew up in poverty, and I went to 4 different elementary schools by the 4th grade. I know now the challenges that my mother was experiencing as she's working 16-hour days, slightly more than minimum wage, trying to find the right place for her kid to be educated, hoping that the place that he was safe, clean. I got there and came home at the same time. Not at the same time, the same day. So those concerns are concerns of parents. It doesn't matter if you're a black kid or a white kid. There are no black kid issues and white kids issues. There are only kids issues. And so when you look at today, because of COVID has exposed the lie of the teachers' unions. As a result, we've seen more parents, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, the majority population all agree 60% or higher. 60% or higher that school choice, the time is now. So it's a way for us to unify the country. Man, I must be almost done. Thank you very much. Young man, when I talk too long, you just do that again, okay? We got a deal back there. Another thing I've said on the campaign trail, you may have seen it on your television screens around the state. I said very clearly that if you are able-bodied in America, you work. Second thing I said is if you take out a loan, you pay it back. The third thing I've said is if you commit a violent crime, you go to jail. And I said this at the debate, and I said this on TV. If God made you a man, you play sports against men. 4 simple value propositions. 90% of Republicans agree with me. Over 60% of Democrats agree with those issues. Over 50% of millennials agree with those issues. Black folks, white folks, Asians, Hispanics, all agree with that value proposition. So one of the ways you unite the country as a conservative is to be moored in my conservatism, optimistic with my view of our future, but undeniably committed to the well-being of this nation, regardless of what you look like, and regardless of whether you vote for me or not. I don't want to be a Republican president. I want to be an American president. I'm going to focus on being the right thing for our nation. I'll give you a shorter answer so I get to more questions. I apologize for taking so long the first 3. Answer is no. Next question. How's that? How's that going? Yes, sir. Thank you for laughing, by the way. This you make it easier when we're having a good time together, so I appreciate that.
And I'm a boring finance guy, but I look.
I'll sit down for this question.
You know, I look at the debt that the US government has.
Yes, sir.
And the liabilities, which approach approximately $39 trillion now. And if you look at the unfunded liabilities, principally Social Security and Medicare, of about $79.5 trillion. You add it together, it's 118. By the way, most businesses have to put their unfunded liabilities on the books.
Yes.
You know, what's your plan to address that? We can't keep doing this.
Great question. So, the long end or the short part of the question was, y'all people crazy up there, is what he said first. Second thing he said is, has anyone taken an accounting course? And the answer is not many. So I'll answer the question as I understood it. One of the challenges that we have as a nation is, you look at the first quarter growth this year, quarter growth this year was 1.1%. That's what we call anemic growth. Growth at 1.1% is not even not competitive. It's embarrassing. We're not even close to COVID. It's embarrassing. So what our nation needs in order to be successful, especially to meet the obligations from servicing our debt, which I'll come to, dealing with our mandatory spending, which I'll come to, is to grow our economy closer to 5%. You probably know this if you're a finance guy. 5% growth in this nation adds trillions of dollars of economic activity to the nation, and it will add billions of dollars of revenue to the Treasury, allowing for us to deal with the long-term challenges that we have in Social Security, Medicare, and other parts of our entitlement state, and our mandatory spending. Don't forget that we spend $400 billion thereabout on our veterans' benefits. We need to do a better job with how much we're spending and how we're spending it. So it's not just Social Security, which costs us a little over $1 trillion, or Medicare that's over $800 billion. We have also a debt service, which is interest only, is about $570 billion this year, interest only on our debt. And we have a president with an unlimited credit card until January 2025. That's already said this cycle, this fiscal year, he's going to spend 40 cents on the dollar more than we bring in. The first and most effective way to deal with that is to turn the spigot off. Y'all know what a spigot is, right?
Yeah.
Just got to turn it off. Maybe go to the pipe and just undo the pipe too, right? We've got to quit spending money we don't have, trying to impress a world that's unimpressed buying things we know we can't afford. Number one, compassion is not extending benefits to ourselves and passing our bills to our grandkids. That's not compassion. It also violates Proverbs 22:7. It says the borrower is slave to the lender. We need to remember that. We should ask ourselves, who's buying that $30+ trillion worth of debt? China, buying a lot of it, too much of it. And so for us to deal with that, number one, I think we have to grow our economy at 5%. By doing so, I have something called Made in America, creates 10 million jobs in 3 specific industries plus more. One is our energy. I believe, according to all the estimates and experts I've spoken to, 3 million jobs is a minimum that we could create if we unleashed our energy resources and created certainty and predictability in our regulatory state. Number two, the innovation economy is going to create so many jobs. 2 million is a minimum. And then high-tech manufacturing creates between 3 and 5 million additional jobs in the next 4 years of my presidency. So that will help us grow. Second thing you have to do is you have to control your spending. We as a nation need to do what every other state in this nation has to do. I believe it's 49 out of 56 actually. Balance your budget. We need a balanced budget amendment that requires us to constrain our spending, and the 10th Amendment committee that started this off with will help us understand we shouldn't be doing it anyways. Others should be doing it. And the final thing I have to say is that we'd have to do things like rescind or revote the Inflation Reduction Act. As an example, the Inflation Reduction Act actually increased inflation, and the only thing it reduced was money in our pockets as Americans. We've lost thousands of dollars of spending power because of Bidenomics. Cutting that off and restoring tax cuts and eliminating the tax increases would go a long way to having that kind of stimulative impact in our economy. And controlling spending through a balanced budget amendment would be very helpful for us to rein in that overspending. As President of the United States, I would commit to not overspending like you're seeing today. Yeah, I can't say that I know all the subsidies to the industries, because some would say that some of the farm subsidies in our bill, on the ag bill, would be a part of those subsidies. So I'd have to see those individual subsidies that you're talking about specifically in order to say yes to those things.
Okay.
Follow up.
I haven't found any place in the Constitution where it says the government's supposed to subsidize anyone. And when you are sworn into office, don't you take an oath to uphold the Constitution? There's a 2-sentence rule that could be implemented to stop the waste from spending. Any elected official who votes in favor of deficit spending shall be required to pledge all of their personal assets as collateral for the debt created under legislation. Period. If that debt is not paid in full within 1 year of initiation, all of the pledged assets shall be seized and sold at auction to the highest bidder, with all the proceeds going to pay down the debt. The budget's balanced.
I'll give you my $12 right now. But that's not what I'm going to worry about on the results of that. I hear your point without any question. I would say understanding what a subsidy is would be really helpful. I'm not sure that some would tell you that the farm insurance is a subsidy. They would tell you that the insurance that we have, the FEMA that subsidizes states and localities as well as businesses at the end of the hurricane that we're seeing in Florida, the tornadoes that we see around the country, earthquakes that we see, they would say that I certainly would think that the green energy conversation and concept are areas where I think of subsidies I would be happy to get rid of, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I would vote against farm subsidies depending on what they look like, and I'm not sure that I would vote against hurricane assistance or tornado disasters as well. So I'd have to see exactly what you're talking about, but pledging your assets as a way of reining in our spending is a provocative idea. I appreciate the question. Yes, ma'am.
As a small business owner previously, you probably are acquainted with the idea of a zero-based budget.
Oh, yes.
Would that be something that could be introduced to
Yes,
agencies?
absolutely.
Okay.
We've done it before on the state level. When I was the chair of the county, I did the exact same thing. So zero-based budgeting is really helpful, because what doesn't happen in Washington is what she just described. What she described is the ability that every year you start back off at zero. You have to compete for every penny you think your agency needs. The way it works in Washington is that if you had $100 last year, you get $104 next year. And if you only get $103 next year, you just got a 25% cut. It's the only place where an increase is a cut. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that one of the things that we could do very quickly to rein in our spending is to make every agency compete against the last budget, and frankly against the progress that they've made with those dollars. Having, once I said this earlier in one of my answers, is the importance of accountability on how we spend what we spend is undeniable and essential. For us to do so, we go a long way.
Thank you for taking my question.
Yes, sir.
Since President Trump appears to be the leader in the polls and so forth in this race, how do you distinguish yourself between your platform and what you stand for and former President Trump?
Good question. The question is, how do you distinguish yourself between yourself and President Trump? And I would probably add into it all the other candidates as well. I'm running for the office of presidency, not necessarily against any of the folks who are running as well. But I do think there are really important distinctions between myself and other candidates. I would say that the President Trump and I worked together on the domestic economy, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was the biggest tax cut in the history of the nation. I was one of the 3 primary authors of the legislation in the Senate. Myself, Pat Toomey, and Rob Portman, and then John Thune joined us that summer of 2017 when we passed it. And so having a chance to do that again, I would certainly go back to that legislation, and I would make it permanent. The tax cuts expire on the personal side at the end of 2025. I would make those permanent. One area of comparison that I believe is similarities. Areas of differences, I think the power of persuasion is incredibly important. If we are going to win the next election, the ability for us to get independents to vote with us as opposed to against us is a very clear area of distinction, not in the substance of the policy, but in the style of the delivery that I think will be helpful for a red wave where we win back the majority in the Senate and expand our majority in the House. That is an area that matters. Second, from a foreign policy standpoint, I don't think you can sit down with President Putin and come to a decision in 24 hours. I think that's completely unrealistic. So from my perspective, the aspects of his foreign policy, we were just on different pages. I think that you would have to be a little more robust in your approach on major topics. And I don't necessarily have high regard for dictators and murderers, even if they are world leaders.
Senator Scott, a little earlier you talked about energy independence.
Yes, sir.
I totally agree with you.
Okay.
I think some of the answers out there, I'm a farmer.
Yes, sir. I had a feeling.
Yep. I remember as a corn and soybean farmer.
Yes, sir.
We're looking at liquid fuels, liquid renewable fuels. The current administration seems to be hung up on electricity, or EVs, which I don't think will work in all parts of the country. What's your position on EVs versus a liquid renewable fuels?
Yeah, so the bifurcating our choice of cars. Some want EVs for our future, and others want oil, basically gas. Ethanol as well, which of course was mixed into the oil. You're right. When a man has Iowa corn on his shirt, don't argue about corn on his shirt. I'm slow, but I'm not that slow. Okay. So here's what America says today. Today, I believe it is under 10% of the cars on the road today are EVs. And the highest level of credits are for EVs. So by giving away money from $4,500 to $7,500, does that induce people to buy something maybe they don't want it? So the answer is a simple answer. I support letting people choose the cars that they want without those perverse incentives in the tax code that suggest that buying an electric vehicle is somehow in the owner's best interest when they have to be induced to do something that they would not do without that credit. Which goes back to the question of subsidies, in my opinion, as well. Second thing I'd say as well is that the infrastructure within our nation to support EVs is essentially non-existent. It would cost hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion, for us to upgrade this nation for EVs as this administration wants it. I say let people buy what they want to buy without the actual benefits of a tax credit. If you want it, you buy it. If you don't, you don't. Let's not pick winners and losers in our government, in the private sector. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned earlier school choice in your,
Yes, sir.
My family has chosen school choice, and then we've decided to homeschool our kids at home.
Yes.
Because we've taken the approach, we're not raising kids, we're raising adults.
Thank you.
With education though, as it comes to higher education, we live in a country right now where higher education has become very expensive, and a lot of people take on a lot of debt. And how do we encourage people in other modes of higher education to get into other industries that maybe don't require a degree in our established educational system beyond high school? Trade schools, I'm not necessarily asking like, what would you do? Because I don't necessarily want you to do anything, but just your thoughts on how we can encourage a next generation to pursue being a plumber, being an electrician, being, some of these jobs that pay really well and we really, really need.
Well, I hate that I have an answer for you, but I'm going to give it to you anyways. So, number one, I think this is something really important that we should not miss is foundational in the answer that you're looking for from me without actually naming a specific policy, is that giving parents that choice of education includes homeschooling. I've spoken to 5 homeschool graduations over the last 10 years because I appreciate the strength of the student coming out of that classroom, so to speak. The education that they're receiving seems to be more universal. Kids are very prepared for competition when they end up in college, so we've seen that happen. Number one. Number two, I would say that a part of my empowering parents and defending kids, my rollout of that plan today includes providing more resources through tax benefits or writing off some of the school expenses for homeschoolers. And today that we did discriminate against homeschool parents because you have to pay your taxes to the schools, and yet you can't write off anything you buy for your kids to be educated. I think we have to recalibrate the system and make it easier for homeschool parents to receive the tax credits while they're paying taxes for other kids to go to school. When you think about, you're too young to know, remember these days, I am not. Maybe there are a couple of others who are old enough to remember something called SHOP. in high school? Any, only half of y'all old enough over here. Let me look over here for a second here. For those of us who remember SHOP, SHOP was a really important part of the decision making on what you wanted to do for the rest of your life. We shouldn't have SHOP just in high school. We should have it in middle school as well. They say that most people make the decision on what they're going to do with their lives from a professional perspective between the 5th and the 8th grade. Middle school for us starts around 6th grade. But I would tell you that making sure that there's a dual path in the K through 12 education where a kid could say, I'd rather work with my hands and my head. But back in the 80s when I was in high school, I know y'all thought it was the 1990s, but it was the 80s when I was in high school. That's funnier than y'all are laughing. But anyway, so back in the 80s when I was in high school, we had SHOP, but we also were sold that if you wanted to have a good living, there was only one way to do it, was to go to college, get a 4-year degree. That's just wrong. I had an audience in New Hampshire a couple days ago, and this kid asked me a question, 17-year-old kid, and I said, someone needs to become a welder. And he says, that's exactly what I'm in school for, because he says he can make a 6-figure income becoming a welder before he's 20 years old. So why not have, I see you creeping over here. He's coming to tell me to stop talking. So, wrong or right?
One more question.
Yeah, see, so.
And then we time to shake hands for about 10 minutes, and he's going to talk with the media in this side room.
Do I have to talk to the media inside? That sound room is hot. It's hot. Okay. Let me finish the question. So if we went back to a place where, when I was in high school, you don't need a 4-year degree to have a good living. You can make 6 figures today working with your hands. You can have, what my mother taught me was dignity in work by doing something you love. Why not go through an apprenticeship program in 18 weeks and end up with a $60,000 or $70,000 income? If you need a plumber in South Carolina, you're gonna wait a while because they are busy. Electricians are busy. So we need more of these artisan contractors being taught in school for weeks and not years to provide the services that so many of us desperately need.
You have time for one more?
I do. They're pointing at somebody over here with a hat.
Hand up. Very simple question. What do you or we say or tell Trump supporters?
Next question. Okay. What do we or you tell Trump supporters? I would tell Trump supporters, if you like his policies, you like tax cuts, you like $4,400 more in your pockets because you got to keep your own money, I wrote it and he signed it. When I think about the opportunity zones legislation that he's been talking about, and he gives me a lot of credit for it, because I wrote that legislation that brought $50 billion, not a single penny of federal dollars, into the poorest neighborhoods. I wrote that bill and he signed it. If you want this a similar legislative prioritization on the domestic side, I'm your guy. And if you want the power of persuasion so that we win elections going forward, may the Lord bless you to say yes to Tim Scott. But at the end of the day, that's my bill. I know I should stop there because you already clapped, but I would also say we should never allow the Department of Justice to be weaponized against political opponents. It is unacceptable and un-American, and we should all stand for Lady Justice returning the blindfold. I want your vote, but I'm not willing to be the person who sits quiet while our Department of Justice is being ravished with no integrity, no sense of morality. I want a fair nation. I want to win because I'm the guy you want, not because I'm the default choice. Last question, and he will turn my microphone off. Yes, ma'am. Oh.
This is did you pardon Trump?
That's a good question. So I should have stopped 2 questions ago. That's why you keep going. So would I pardon Trump? The answer is I don't know. I would follow the facts and see where they laid, and I would do the right thing. I did the exact same thing when they told me that he made a phone call and that he should have been impeached because of the phone call. I listened, I read every single word about 15 times. I came to the conclusion he did nothing wrong. So I was no way in the world I'm gonna allow the former president to be impeached for something he didn't wrong. He did not do wrong. I think you're innocent until proven guilty, by the way. Thank y'all very much.